Thanks for having me here today. It's really an honor to be delivering the keynote for the conference today. And I'll be honest, I was a bit surprised. I was working with Trina with PB Ministries, and thanks so much for helping make this possible. But I was working with Trina, setting this all up, and she told me all about the annual conference and the event. But one thing I didn't quite grasp was how intergenerational this crowd would be. And it's an absolute pleasure to speak to not just the senior service providers of today and the administrators and the people who do such important work now and for years to come, but also those who will be doing it for the next generation. And it's really exciting. So with that said, I'm Keith Ochwat. I am the producer of Age of Champions, one of the two primary filmmakers for the documentary. Really excited to share it with you today. What I wanted to do for just a few minutes before we get started is give you a little context. So a lot of you might be thinking, well, especially with Deb's very kind introduction, like this guy seems a little too young to be dedicating 3-4 years of his life to telling the story of these different seniors. And I may have felt that way as well when I started, but what happened along the way was really life-changing for me. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But the way it came about was the first thing I want to discuss. So it was a very serendipitous way that we became interested in the Senior Olympics. My film partner and I were at a conference for nonprofits in the arts. We have a 501c3 nonprofit out in California. And the woman seated next to us at this event introduces herself as the CEO of the National Senior Games Association. And so I look at her and I say, well, now what's that? And she says, well, we put on the Senior Olympics every 2 years. And my jaw just about dropped. It's like the senior what? The Senior Olympics? She's like, yeah, well, it's a competition for athletes who are 50 to 100 plus. They compete in a myriad of sports from swimming and diving to track and field events, volleyball, basketball, bocce ball, table tennis, racquetball, and the such. And I couldn't believe my ears. I'm like, well, I've heard of the Special Olympics and I've heard of the Olympics, but not the Senior Olympics. So we did a little research. We were very excited to learn more about the competition. And then once we started meeting the athletes that actually compete, the seniors themselves, we were hooked. We knew we had to tell the story. So what we did was we partnered with the National Senior Games Association, and they sent out a casting call on our behalf to all of the athletes who were signed up for that year's national competition. We ended up getting about 1,000 responses. There were people from across the country, different sports. We asked people to send a photo, a brief bio, and what sport they play and why they compete. And we ended up choosing a 100-year-old tennis player from Boston, an 86-year-old pole vaulter from San Antonio, his 89-year-old arch rival from Dallas. Got to have that Texas rivalry. A team of grandmother basketball players in their 60s and 70s, and two brothers in their late 80s and early 90s from Washington, D.C., who are swimmers, one of whom is battling cancer as he's training to compete. So we chose these characters, and then we set out to tell their stories. And what we set out to do is not really tell a story about sports, because we didn't find that to be the most amazing part of the idea of the Senior Olympics, but rather figure out what makes them tick. Why are these people competing? Why are they interested in pushing themselves, pushing through the pain and the difficulties that come with aging, arthritis, cancer, losing a spouse, and pushing through and becoming a champion at that stage in their life. And so what we wanted to do was make a movie about people. And that's what we ended up focusing on. And as we got to meet the characters and the athletes that compete, we were, as filmmakers, sort of filled with this enthusiasm and this sense of humor and this sense of inspiration. And that became our mission as filmmakers, to share that emotion with our audience so that as you watch the film, you would feel the same, we hope. So with that, what I'd like to do is get ready to share the movie with you. The movie runs about 50 minutes, and then what we'll do after showing the film is I'll give you an update on all the characters, and then tell you where they're at today, and a lot of them are still competing. And then we will do a Q&A. So as questions come up, I know a lot of you are students in the room, which is really exciting. So, and a lot of you have something to write down. If any questions come to mind, please jot them down, because I'd love to have a nice Q&A conversation with you. The last thing I want to say is that people always ask me, now why is it that these people are special? Why are they senior athletes? Why can Adolf pole vault at 86? Why can Roger play tennis at 100? And my mother, she's obsessed with living to be 100. And so she asked me, Keith, find out what they eat, find out what they drink, their sleeping patterns, what their hobbies are. And so, I was like, okay, Mom, I'll do that. So I had it in the back of my mind as we go out to start filming. And we had our first shoot with Roger, the 100-year-old tennis player, and he lives actually in Cape Cod, just outside of Boston. And we were out to dinner, and it's our first meal together, and I was expecting for him to get some sort of kale salad or have like a shot of ginger juice and beet juice, things that we eat in California actually, but it shouldn't poke too much fun. But he ends up getting the lobster tail, extra butter, baked potato, gin and tonic, and I'm just kind of confused. And then we go on to the next shoot, which is in Washington, D.C. with John and Bradford Tatum. And they take us to their favorite soul food place. And we have this great fried chicken and greens. And I'm just like, what? Okay, it's not the food. It's clearly not the food. Then we get to Adolf, to Texas, and I'll tell you, I ate more beef brisket than anyone should eat in one period of time. But so it wasn't the food, and it wasn't, an abstinence from alcohol, and it was, so we couldn't figure out. But as time went on, and as we met all the different characters from across the country, and as we got to know other senior athletes that didn't make it into the film, the one thing, the common denominator that I could extrapolate, the only thing I could find in common with them all, was that they have this thing that we all do for most of our lives. We have goals. We have these achievements that we're striving for every day, that we're pushing for, that we push ourselves through barriers, things that perhaps we didn't think we could do. And I think for a lot of seniors, they don't have that anymore. But what I found with all the senior athletes is they do have that. John Tatum, the swimmer you're about to meet, I think had that most explicitly. He's a 90-year-old swimmer, and when we filmed, he's now 94 and still swimming and competing at a national level. But he, on his refrigerator, had a clipping of the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. And when Michael Phelps won, I think 9 or 10 gold medals or whatnot. And he swam a number of events that John Tatum swims. Michael Phelps is a 21-year-old Olympic athlete. John Tatum is a 90-year-old Olympic athlete. And so he had this clipping of Michael Phelps' times for these different events that they both swim. So John Tatum says, well, Michael Phelps, he's about a fourth of my age. So I think that means for the 50-meter freestyle stroke, I should be able to do 4 times his time. So if he's doing it in 20 seconds, I should be able to do it, in about 80 seconds. So that was his goal. He had it written down, and that was what he strove for every day. Even though he'd wake up with arthritis in his shoulder, and even though he'd wake up with, challenges and difficulties that most people face at that age. And I thought that was amazing, and that really inspired me. So with that, why don't we start the movie, and then, like I said, please, if any questions come up about the filmmaking process, the characters, make a note, and then we'll get to it afterwards. But thanks again for having me, and we'll go ahead and get started.